Thinking about moving back home? We've already helped hundreds secure citizenship, housing, relocation, driver's licenses, and business setup. Endorsed by Ghana's Office of the President, we make your move seamless. Learn more at www.r2gh.com. Your new life is waiting.
Can someone who wasn't born on the continent fully understand African spiritual sciences without learning the languages that shape those systems?
It would be very difficult. I would say both those who are born outside of the continent and those who are born on the continent. What I found, and each and every person who comes here, like we've done the Sankofa journey, sankofajourney.com for those who are looking, for 27 years. And every single person is shocked when they find out that, if you ask somebody, their Ga, right? You'll ask them to count to 10. Once they start getting past 4 and 5, because they're used to doing, their transactions in English, right? Once people's in the same thing in Akan, in, most of the languages, that these are people, this is their own language. But now once you're doing basic things like, all right, we'll count to 6, 7, 8, they don't like, they start getting lost and then they switch back to their English. Same thing for colors. I remember I was at the School of Languages conference, and this is when our now Vice President, Prof. Nana Poko Ajimai, when she was Minister of Education, said that, basically that indigenous languages should be compulsory and so forth and so on. And there was like this huge firestorm. Well, how do you say electron? How do you say this? How would you even say that? And it came up and this is at University of Ghana. This is again when she was Minister of Education, and people were saying, "How many of you?" So they had a panel, and she was invited to the panel. One of the panelists said, "How do you even say brown in tree?" And here's the this is at ISO conference hall. I remember there are like a good 500 people. Most of them are native speakers of tree, or at least speak it secondarily. And they asked, "Well, who knows how to say the word brown?" I raised my hand. Why? Because my supervisor, Prof. Osam, shout out to him, he had me read the dictionary from cover to cover. This is the 1933 edition of the Cristala Dictionary. I read it cover to cover. So like I knew that the word is dodoye. Dodoye, that's the word for brown. And you found it in expressions like mehon dodome kakra. Like my body browns me a little bit is what you're saying, but that's the way they say you're not feeling so well, such and such. But this is something that comes up. And last time, actually a time or two ago, I was on I Never Knew TV. I talked about how the English language is rewiring the brains of the native speakers of the language. So if you wanted to say something like ahuhra deme, you're saying steam takes hold of me. But because people have already gotten their mouths ready to speak English, they'll say maya hot, right? So like I am this, you are that. So now that we're thinking about I am this or you are that, now our entire way of phrasing something. And what's ironic about this is that if you look at languages in Jamaica and Suriname, the main way that they say that these are still, the languages, indigenous languages or black people that have this connection and so forth is on the syntax, right? Even if the lexicon has been, bleached out, whatever, with French or with Spanish or with English or whatever, the syntax is where you still find that they're able to say, like you have serial, all these things that are just like how the languages are here. But what you're finding now here on the continent is that even the syntax has eroded, where, just like the example I've given, the structure of the sentence would be a particular type of way if you're speaking Ga or Chi or Yoruba. But once you start thinking in English first, now your whole orientation has changed. Now coming directly to the point about, those from the diaspora, it's interesting. I was just in Burkina Faso, and there was a sister who was like, "Oh, I'm being initiated into Dogon, something, something." But of course, she doesn't speak Dogon, clearly, right? And, they're saying, oh, the Dogon people are the exact same people of classical Kemet, but they're not the only ones. If you look at the research of Mamse Khanta Diop, Theophilo Benga, they've shown that you can find aspects of the language of classical Kemet in Akan, in Yoruba, in Wolof, that was mainly Mamse Khanta Diop's work, in, Congo, Kikongo, and languages all throughout the continent. So to say the Dogon are the only one, it misses the entire point of Kemet, because Kemet means the land of black people. So all these black people, you could find aspects of their language in Medu Neter, and then you'll find aspects of Medu Neter in all of these contemporary languages. That's one. But again, because she doesn't know, Medu Neter, and then she also doesn't know Dogon, you have these people who are, marrying, non-black people. They're marrying white, quote unquote, white people. They're initiating them and so forth. Meanwhile, if you actually read any text from Kemet, for example, the prophecy of Nefertiti, it talks about how when these non-black people come into Kemet, we drove them away. It actually, and I just presented on this on Saturday about Ameni, right? This ruler who comes up from the south and then drives them out of Kemet, right? Before that, you can find the autobiography of Weni, where he talks about, the two sides of the house come together from Medinit in the north to Abu in the south, that the Medjay Nahasyu, the Nahasyu are referred to as the Nubians or Cushites, depending on what term in English you want. I just use the term Nahasyu because that's the original term. But it talks about the Ka'au Nahasyu, the Irjet Nahasyu, Medjay Nahasyu, and goes through all of these black people who have all come together to drive. And again, this goes back to the original question about the symbolism of the vulture and so forth, that all of them are coming together to drive these non-blacks out of the land of black people. So imagine you're coming to learn about Kemet, and the main thing about Kemet, you've missed it because you don't know how to read anything, where Kemet is, it means the land of black people, and the main thing in Kemet is to drive them out. But in Kemet, you had those who were always very, very vigilant and cognizant of the role of maintaining Kemet as a land of black people. But at the same time, you had those who were sellouts, who were allowing them to, these non-blacks to come into Kemet. So just in the text that I mentioned, Sarah Kamos, right? So in the text of Sarah Kamos, he talks about, these Hyksos, Hakal Hasut, they've come into Kemet, right? But he asked his counselors, what should he do about it? And some are saying, we graze our cattle. They send, emmer wheat for our cattle to graze and so forth. We have our water, they have their water. So they're basically fine. The status quo. These invaders have come into the land of black people, Kemet, and they've taken over land. They've taken, over the authority and so forth. But his counselors are saying it's fine, just leave things be. If they do anything against us, then we'll do something against them then. And Sarah Combos, he responds to them. He says, dividing the land with me is not tolerable for me. And he wages war and he drives them out of the land of black people in what we can think of as one of, if not the first war of black liberation, right? Now, look at Sarah Kamos doing that. This means that you had people in Kemet who were like Sarah Kamos, but then you also had people in Kemet who were like his counselors who were like, it's fine. The French are here. They're stealing our gold. Let's just let it be, right? That's the Blaise Compaoré type, right? In the same text, the two stela of Sarah Kamos, he talks about someone named Teti, son of Pepi. Now, here is someone who was from Kemet, a black person, ostensibly, right? But what Sarah Kamos's complaint is, he says that he will wage battle with him and he will slit open his belly because this guy, Teti, son of Pepi, he allowed these Amu, these non-black foreigners, to come into Kemet, and he made the town of Neferusi like a nest for them, right? And you can think about modern day equivalencies of those who let in AFRICOM, those who, whatever. All of these types of things, Altmanier in Congo, right? You had the Kasavubus versus the Lumumbas. So we had people who were true to it, but then you also had those who were anti-black sellouts in Kemet. So it's not enough to say, oh, I'm learning rituals from Kemet. Well, not everyone from Kemet is the one that we need to emulate. We need to be like Sarah Kamos. We need to be like Ameni. We need to be like Imahuweni, because all of them came up against, and the difference was that Sarah Kamos was the ruler. He had the power to overrule all of those sellouts who were around him. And he was very clear to point out that all of these counselors were saying, just let it be. But he himself stood on business, as they say now, and was like, I'm not going to allow this to be the case. And he says that they're going to call him Met Kemet, the protector of Kemet. Again, coming back to that vulture-like, protection of the environment, protection of the children, protection of the self. And sometimes you'll see in the iconography the vulture, like I said, with the wings around the ruler. So he himself has to be protected. And, when I was in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, his role is to protect them against the France, and not just France, but all of these other non-black enemies who are invading Burkina Faso, who are invading Mali, not only invading physically, but invading with their so-called jihadist ideologies and so forth. So not only is he protecting the society thereby protects him. So when you go in there, you can see all of these people lined up. They got guns. They're, patting down everybody. They're making sure that he is a protector and he also is protected. And those are the two sides of it. So again, if you look at, learning the language, if you don't know the language, like how would you, like I'm speaking to this because I've read I've read hundreds of texts from classical Kemet in the original Medu Neter, right? Now, if you don't understand the Medu Neter, you're dependent on someone to give you a translation, and that translation may not be accurate. An example of that would be if you look at Faulkner's translation of the Coffin text. Now, anyone who reads Medu Neter, anyone who studies Medu Neter formally, they're going to come across Faulkner, who has this concise dictionary of Middle Egyptian. Now, in his translation of the Coffin text, he talks about, the chaos gods, right? He says, in the beginning, before there was any creation, anything came to be, there were these chaos gods. And then when you go and look at his, translation notes, he says, I'm calling them chaos gods because to say myriads or multitudes doesn't make any sense. But when you go to the original Medu Neter, you see that it says Hehu, which is like talking about millions or, multitudes and so forth. But because of his orientation, he's thinking about the Latin ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. And his idea is that in the beginning, there was nothing but chaos. But then out of that chaos came the order of all of creation that we know of. So he's allowing his own biases and influence to, translate it in a particular type of way. But if you actually if you actually understood the worldview was coming from, the idea is that in the beginning there was Amen and Amenet, that's masculine and feminine hiddenness. You have Nun and Nawanet, that's masculine and feminine wetness. You had Ke and Keket, that's masculine and feminine darkness. And you have He and Hehet, that's masculine and feminine infiniteness. Now, what that's telling you is if you understand creation, then you understand procreation. And if you understand procreation, then you understand creation. It's giving you these are the qualities of the female womb. Infinite possibilities. If you look at DNA, recombinant DNA, so forth and so on, there are infinite possibilities. Out of those possibilities comes you, right? In that primordial water referred to as Noon and now Net, then you had infinite possibilities. And out of those possibilities, what we see around us is what has actually come to be. It's actually a very profound thing, much more profound than the Latin ordo ab chaos. But if all you got was this English translation, in the beginning was chaos, and then you start talking about, you start slapping people around, you kick things over because it's like, yeah, chaos. And you have the entirely wrong idea. Isfet is chaos, but that's not what we're talking about in the original text. We're talking about Hehu, which is talking about millions, it's talking about multitudes. So again, what I'm talking about, I'm sure the sister who's getting initiated by quote unquote Dogon priests who are married to white people, she's not getting any of those primary texts. So she's entirely dependent on what are they going to translate to her and how are they going to translate to her. And then on top of that, you're going to have all of their proclivities, all of these vectors of compromise. They've been compromised by these non-Black people. They've been compromised by their money. They've been compromised by their ideology. If they ever said anything against these non-Black people who had come in, well, guess what? Those non-Black people aren't going to pay them to initiate them anymore. They're going to divorce them, the ones who married them. Their green card status of living in Chicago is going to be revoked. All of these quote unquote benefits that they give to you just because they know that this is going to compromise you, all of those things will go away. So they're going to make sure they're going to tell you things in such a way that's going to be accommodationist to, their proclivities, just like in classical Kemet. So when we say Kemet, everyone talks about, it's great, it's glorious, and so forth. But we need to nuance it. And we need to come to the understanding that in Kemet, you had those who were true to maintaining Kemet as a land of Black people, because that's what it means. When we call ourselves Kemetiu, that means Black people. When you had Sabi Kem, when you had Henanit Kem, you had Hepi Kem, all of them, Sabi Kem is saying Sabi the Black. When you say Henanit Kem, Henanit the Black one. Hepi Kem, Hepi the Black one. And then even if you look at Coptic, the last stage of the language, you can find in the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, it says, don't look at me because I am Black. And the word that they use is kame, right? It's the exact same word with the same lexical form and the same semantic meaning to mean Black. So you can actually trace it because, Coptic being the last stage of the written language, you can actually find this. But again, if you don't have access to the text yourself, then you're, beholden to the ones who are going to translate for you. And like I mentioned with Faulkner, like I mentioned to these quote unquote, Dogon priests who are initiating white people, who now have a financial interest in making sure that anything that may offend them is, put to the side. So first, most people haven't even read the primary text, but let's say that they've read any of these texts. They're not going to tell you about the autobiography of Winnie. They're not going to tell you about the prophecy of Nefertiti. They're not going to tell you about the lamentations of Ipuwer. They're not going to tell you about the instruction of Kheti to his son Mary Kare. They're not going to tell you about, Sanhat. They're not going to tell you about all of these texts. These are text after text, and all of them are on the same topic. When these non-blacks come into Kemet, they bring death and destruction, rape and ravage, pillage and plunder. But now look at what these descendants of Kemet, and all of us are, look at what they're doing. They're doing the exact same thing that the sellouts in classical Kemet did. So I'll close on that point.